creating a more competitive and efficient banking system. His reforms not only saved India from the brink of collapse, but also laid the foundation for sustained economic growth. The policies attracted foreign investments, boosted exports, created new industries. Millions of Indians were lifted out of poverty as job opportunities expanded. By dismantling socialist controls, India transitioned into a market-driven economy, setting the stage for its rise as one of the world's fastest-growing economies. Bureau Report, India Today.
Before becoming Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh made his name as an economist, teaching at the Delhi School of Economics, working at the United Nations Trade and Development in Geneva. He also studied at Oxford, Cambridge, was governor of the RBI, vice chairperson of the Planning Commission. So here really was a human being who came from a very strong academic foundation. And to talk a bit about his legacy as an economist, we've spoken so much about his time as Prime Minister, about his innings as a politician, but to speak about his legacy as an economist, I'm joined by leading economist Dr. Atin Roy. Dr. Roy, welcome. You would have been a young economist growing up when Dr. Singh was Chief Economic Advisor, then at the Planning Commission, Finance Ministry, and ultimately Prime Minister. Looking in the rearview mirror, what do you think is the most important economic legacy Dr. Singh leaves India with?
Thank you, Rahul. Well, I must confess that I have two things in common with Dr. Singh. We went to the same college in Cambridge, and he did once take me out for dinner. Not when the economic crisis had happened, just before, when he was in Geneva with the South Commission. And neither of us worked for the World Bank or the IMF, unlike most economists. We both worked for the UN. And therefore, I think I would say that he left behind two economic legacies which have not been commented on. I'm sure many people have commented on many things. Getting India out of its first existential crisis, the nuclear deal, etc. But it wasn't that. You see, Dr. Singh had this amazing ability to lead and therefore to develop teams that would work under his leadership, deliver results. And that started in 1974, when India was facing very high inflation. He was Chief Economic Advisor, and he managed to get inflation under control. Then when he was in the Reserve Bank of India, all that you see in terms of reforms of India's financial system today started when he commissioned a report by Professor Sukumar Chakravarti on the working of the Indian financial system, whose implementation over the next 10 or 15 years has led to India having a modern financial system. And so on and so forth. But it's quite remarkable if you look at his ability to work with economists older than him. Arjun Sengupta, I.G. Patel, Baghecha Minhas, economists who were his contemporaries, Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, economists who were junior to him, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, Dr. Kaushik Basu, Dr. Monte Kaluvalia. He was able to work with all of them to deliver results for India. And that is the hallmark of a true policy leader. I think, therefore, his legacy, which is unfortunately not being taken up by any of his successors, was to act and behave like a leader in the policy domain and to get others to work with him. That requires two things, which he had in abundance. It requires great confidence in your own technical and analytical capabilities, which he had in good measure. And it requires a very large ego to be able to work with others and give them credit. And he did both. And I think that would be his most important legacy, to the fact that until very recently, India's economy was regarded to be in very competent and capable hands, multiple competent and capable hands. That is a legacy, unfortunately, which has been tarnished now, but that is what I will remember him by.
Dr. Roy, his critics would say he was an overrated economist and underrated politician. Just looking at, his dissertation on Indian exports and trade, and looking just at his academic ability as an economist, where would he stand? You mentioned a lot of his peers, some juniors as well. Where would he stand in your esteem as an economist?
Well, you see, his academic career, in fact, like mine, was very short. it's a rite of passage in economics. You go into academia, you get tenure, and then if you want to do other more interesting things, you leave. So as an economist, he did what academic economists stop at, which is he was competent in his plumbing, in his use of technical tools, and he had developed a good analytical capabilities. But as an economic policy practitioner, what I call tradecraft of economic policy and practice, he was hugely successful. I think also, if I may, Rahul, this binary that I know my own community of economists use, bad economist, better politician, I think it's false. I think he was a good economist because he had no illusions about being a politician. He was what I call unelectable. There have been many in our history, unelectables, but unlike today's unelectables, and unlike some unelectables in his own party, his domain expertise and his ability to crisis manage and to deliver prosperity was why he was put in a job. So he was crystal clear. He became finance minister because India was in the middle of an existential financial crisis, and he had to resolve that. He did that with the Prime Minister's full cooperation and the inputs of many others whom he himself acknowledged. Job well done. He was appointed as Prime Minister in 2004, not because he was electorally, anyone big, but because he was deemed to be the only person who could actually manage a diverse political coalition and deliver results. He was lucky, in my view, in only one respect. Everyone needs a bit of luck, but he made the most of it, which is in 2004, well, for a long time, the Congress Party had lost its ideology. It had no ideology at all. And he was not a threat to anybody, so he was able to use his economic credentials to deliver an ideological approach to the party, which has been responsible for the much of the prosperity India saw. And again, never forget, manage crises for India very capably, very effectively. He then branched out and used that domain expertise to make the most of his foreign policy background, both in the South Commission and in the UN, and delivered us a nuclear deal and much better relations with our neighbors than we unfortunately have now.
Yeah,
These, I think, are what made him, I think, one of India's foremost practitioners of economic policy tradecraft. And therefore, I think the economist-politician binary is wrong. And it's not really relevant. I mean, sure, he was good. So are thousands of professors in thousands of universities all over the world. There are as many professors as there are probably IAS officers in India. One doesn't remember any of them for being professors or IAS officers. One does remember Dr. Manmohan Singh, and his portrait hangs in St. John's College, in the hall in St. John's College, not because he was professor of something, but because he was one of the world's foremost practitioners of economic policy, more in the tradition of Keynes, the economist in Treasury, who never held an academic job in economics, than in the tradition of more run-of-the-mill academics from universities that you hear about and forget in a minute.
Now let's spend a moment on the contradictions between the time when he served in a socialist era as chief economic advisor from 1972 to 76, as RBI governor from 82 to 85, and then as finance minister from 91 onwards when he becomes a champion of free trade. The point would be that under a more socialist regime, he kept his free trade instincts at bay, and therefore was he an economist and also therefore an opportunist in that regard?
The distinction there, Rahul, is he was absolutely clear why he was hired and what is the job that he had to do. And that clarity very often is lacking in my tribe. He was hired as chief economic advisor to solve a problem of very high inflation. He was not hired to deliver prosperity to the Indian economy. He did that with a team very successful. He was not hired to speak contrary to the prevailing political ideology of the day. And therefore, he did not, which was, protectionism, no free trade, etc. But in 1991, when his job demanded that he embrace free trade to save India from an existential crisis, he did it. It is not as if he was a rabid free marketer. He repeatedly said that India will have to have a public sector and a private sector that coexists. However, he had realized that India could no longer afford the luxury of no free trade, of high amounts of industrial licensing, and the rent-seeking and corruption that came with that. So he opened up the economy to good effect. And he was non-doctrinaire enough to understand that India being treated like a nuclear pariah was one of the biggest obstacles to India's transformative prosperity. And therefore, he put his political capital there, and he managed to get the nuclear deal, at least signed, if not fully implemented. And that actually showed his results-oriented approach. And that is what you want from an unelectable prime minister. You want an effective policy practitioner who is results-oriented. And he has given us enough examples in his lifetime of achieving and delivering those successful results. So it doesn't really matter whether he was pro-free trade or anti-free. It's not like, are you pro-Hindutva, do you like Muslims or not? That is not how economics works. You have a job to do, you go out there and do it in the circumstances of your time. And in that respect, he did it very well. And he had no pretensions. He had no pretensions to being a politician. If you read Sanjay Baru's book, he says that. He says, I do not want to get political credit. I want to get credit for doing the job that I did do. And I don't want people going around saying it's all due to the great Honorable Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. He had a very big ego, in short, which is what is woefully lacking today.
His career was also a technocrat's dream. So many different capacities across so many decades in different parts of government, and then ultimately rising to the apex of becoming Prime Minister. For young technocrats looking at the murky world of Indian politics, A, he was able to attract excellent talent, and B, what do you think is the legacy that he leaves behind? Because was it just a lot of luck and opportunity that came at the right moment? I mean, ultimately, the job of finance minister was offered to Patel before it was offered to Manmohan Singh. IG Patel refused, which is why he came in. So is this just a lot of happenstance and coincidence and good luck?
No, I don't think so. But to the extent, yes, India was a newly evolving independent country. It was therefore possible in those days to appoint a chief economic advisor who was just 40 years old. I remember him once saying to me many years later that a chief economic advisor should never be older than 50. Because if you understand how the finance ministry works, the chief economic advisor may hold the rank of secretary to government, but they only run one division in the Department of Economic Affairs. And therefore, you can't have ego hassles with the IAS who basically run the government of India. So if you're 40, 42, you don't have those ego hassles. If you have the great gift of being able to listen to a politician and persuade them to do something that you want done, which he had in spades, then I think that is a huge mark of success. So what I would tell technocrats is leave the econometrics, etc. to university professors and plumbers. You can hire them. Learn from him how to be results focused, understand why you have a particular job and what it is you need to do to deliver results in that job, just like any other job, and then apply your skills to build teams to do that job without expecting to be treated like a politician with their own political base and power. What he teaches, I think, all policy practitioners is our kicks in life are different. His kicks in life are very different from Narendra Modi's. His kicks in life do not come from the adulation of the masses or any kind of brown-nosing or being called a Vishwaguru or great scholar. His kicks in life came from doing a job and doing it well, completing and finishing it. That requires political skills, that requires analytical abilities, that requires the ability to build and lead teams. And these are the skills I think that policy practitioners going forward need to have in spades. And what we can all learn from him is how to get them. Was he an opportunist? Did he play games? Yes, of course he did. Politics is a dirty business, as is the business of policy. It's a dog-eat-dog profession. But he had a very positive attitude to it, which I'd like to share. One day, he asked somebody, I think it was either Montek or somebody else in the 90s, to do something. No, it was in the RBI in the 80s. 3 or 4 people were asked to do something. The next morning, he had come with a paper where that thing was done. Another economist asked him, why did you do it? We were all asked to do it. He said, you should never yield space. When you're given a chance to do something and you can do it, then occupy that space and do it well so you're recognized. So in that very positive sense, he did not yield space to others, but you will never find anyone grudging him that because he was generous with his credit, and many who worked with him, unlike many who followed those who worked with him, rose to positions of great eminence and capability in the fullness of time.
Well, in a very short span in this remembrance, you've covered a lot of ground. Dr. Atin Roy, for joining us with your thoughts. Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
I'm joined on this broadcast by journalist and Dr. Singh's former media advisor, Pankaj Pachauri. Pankaj, welcome. You worked very closely with Dr. Singh when he was Prime Minister, and that's also when he faced some of the most severe criticism for the functioning or the policy paralysis in his government, for all the charges of corruption. What do you make of the kind of outpouring of support across the country, across the political aisle that we've seen in the past 24 hours, given particularly how many of the people who are now congratulating him, thanking him for the work that he did, were amongst his most bitter critics?
Yes, absolutely. They have realized that whatever the opposition he faced at that time was only for the sake of opposition. You do not get 8% of growth over 10 years if you have policy paralysis. You do not have a prime minister who you are alleging of being weak come out in front of the media in a hall full of media people like you and talk without any hesitation for hours at end. So people have finally realized that Manmohan Singh, during his last year, when the charges against him or his government escalated, was basically that charges. And he used to say that let them say what they want to say. I'll keep doing the work I want to do. And he did that, and he did that very honestly. We are seeing the fruits of that work. And in fact, the current government is actually bolstering all the policies he had made, be it Narega, be it Aadhaar, be it right to food and right to education. So it means he has given us a solid foundation for this country, and I'm happy to see that the country is growing and people are realizing.
What kind of a boss was he? You saw him at close quarters. You had different bosses in your career as a journalist and then in your time in government. What kind of a boss was he? Tell us something we don't know about what you saw of him at close quarters.
See, it was very difficult part, because here is someone who used to say that my work will speak for itself. And for a media advisor, it's very difficult to deal with that, because you have to speak for itself. In his time, he had to be convinced that social media and media, to being on media, was part of a modern sort of governance. He has to convinced about that, and sometimes he did, took press conferences, talked to the media, but sometimes he didn't. And now we have reached a situation where media is the governance. So it was a very difficult time, and he used to laugh at it sometimes, and used to say that people will say what they want to say, whatever I'm doing. I'll keep doing what I want to do, and they will change their views. And I'm glad to report that they have changed their views, and you are watching it on your television screen.
How do you compare and contrast the working styles of Dr. Manmohan Singh with current Prime Minister Narendra Modi, given that a lot of what people who worked with Manmohan Singh say about him, that he didn't want credit even for the things that he was doing? And on the other hand, you have a Prime Minister whose government is run in his image, it's run in his stead. He also goes out and asks for votes in his name, which is very different from Dr. Manmohan Singh's case. So you have two Prime Ministers who are diametrically opposite in their approach. It's very difficult to find two such contrasting styles.
As far as the media is concerned, I mean, that is absolutely right. What I can see, I have not worked with Mr. Modi, and I do not know what goes on in the Prime Minister's office at this time currently for the last 10 years. But I can say what I see in the media is that it was a very contrasting style, and the results of which are going to be faced by the country. Because either you can work or you can talk about the work.
Okay. So you're saying, you're obviously his media advisor, and therefore you're delighted with the fact that he's received the kind of positive commentary that he has, especially given the kind of criticism he faced, especially in his last years in office. Pankaj Pachauri, for joining us on this broadcast. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
What do you think would be the most remarkable highlight of Dr. Singh's life?
You can look at Dr. Singh's life at various levels. At a personal level, I would like to focus on his character, his values, his simplicity, and sort of Gandhian way of looking at the world. The world rooted in democracy, human rights, justice, concern for poor, bottom-up development, equity, inclusion. These were very fundamental issues to him at a personal level. At a working level, he was more focused on consensus building. He was a great listener. He was a team player. He was not into hierarchies, feudal approach to management. He allowed people to build consensus. Let them sort it out. He was there observing them, guiding them, but not dictating them. He was not into micromanagement. He was more there to motivate you, empower you, respect you, whether it was on railway reforms, Prasar Bharati bill that I worked on, or Knowledge Commission, innovation, public information infrastructure. He had similar approach to management, leadership, and consensus building. He was not there to take credit. He was not there to really put his foot down. That was not his style. And many misread that as somebody who is very sort of not very powerful. His nuclear deal was an example of his perseverance. He strongly believed that for India to continue at 8% growth, biggest bottleneck will come from energy. We'll deal with human capital, but we will not be able to deal with the energy required.
In turbulence, he birthed a liberalized Bharat. Farewell, Dr. Singh.
A visionary statesman, a pioneer, a man who saw the future. That was Dr. Manmohan Singh. PM Modi led the nation in mourning. He remembered his predecessor as an honest and humble leader whose legacy will endure. The Gandhi family stood in solidarity with Dr. Singh's family. Sonia Gandhi says she's lost a friend, philosopher and guide. Tributes continue to pour in for India's beloved former Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh.
This budget represents a contribution to the successful implementation of this great national enterprise of building an India free from the fear of war, want and exploitation, an India worthy of the dreams of the founding fathers of our republic.
India lost the architect of its new economy in former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh late Thursday night. Singh was admitted to the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, where he breathed his last at 9:51 p.m. The Narendra Modi government has announced a 7-day national mourning. All government celebrations stand cancelled, and the national flag will fly at half-mast in his memory. The last rites of the former Prime Minister will be held on Saturday between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. with full state honours near the Shakti Sthal in Delhi. Prime Minister Modi paid his final respects to Manmohan Singh at his residence on Friday. He was accompanied by Home Minister Amit Shah and BJP President JP Nadda.
एक नेक इंसान के रूप में, एक विद्वान अर्थशास्त्री के रूप में और रिफॉर्म्स के प्रति समर्पित लीडर के रूप में उन्हें हमेशा याद किया जाएगा.
President Draupadi Murmu and Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar paid homage to the former Prime Minister. Congress leaders Sonia Gandhi, Mallikarjun Kharge and Rahul Gandhi too paid their tributes to Manmohan Singh. Leaders across the political spectrum hailed Singh as a towering personality who reshaped India's future.
डॉक्टर मनमोहन सिंह जी का हमारे बीच से चला जाना न केवल देश के लिए एक महान क्षति है, बल्कि मेरे लिए व्यक्तिगत भी। मैं अपनी विनम्र श्रद्धांजलि उनको प्रेषित करता हूं और उनकी आत्मा की शांति के लिए ईश्वर से प्रार्थना करता हूं।
India's cricket team wore black armbands as a mark of respect to Manmohan Singh as they took the field in Melbourne to face host Australia in the 4th Test. From navigating the 1991 economic crisis to sealing the civil nuclear deal that ended decades-long nuke appetite, Manmohan Singh leaves a great legacy. Bureau Report, India Today.
I'm joined now by Rajya Sabha Member of Parliament Milind Deora, who worked as a young ministerial colleague in the cabinet of Dr. Manmohan Singh, now a political adversary, but seen what was right and wrong with the Prime Minister at close quarters in his cabinet. Milind, welcome. When you look back at the life and times of Dr. Manmohan Singh, what did you learn from as a young, impressionable MP in his cabinet? What were the positives that you thought you could latch on to and pick up from the former Prime Minister?
Well, Rahul, firstly, thank you for having me. I have had the privilege of knowing Dr. Manmohan Singh from a young age. He shared a very, very close relationship with my late father. And in fact, 4 months before he became Prime Minister of India, until December 2003, whenever he would come to Mumbai, most of the times that he would come to Mumbai, he would stay at our home. And in that sense, I would have the privilege to interact with him during my student days, well before I entered politics, when I first became an MP, when I was a member of his government, even after he demitted office. And we would have conversations ranging from, geopolitics, culture, party affairs, to India's economy, to the world economy. And I have many examples and there are many anecdotes that I can give you, but broadly what I would say is that what struck me about him when I first met him, the first impression to the last impression was that he was someone who had no ego about him. He was always accessible. When I say accessible, I mean not just in terms of his time, but he was willing to share his mind space with people who meet him. He never discriminated on the basis of age or experience. When I was a young student studying in America, at that point when I would go to him to seek his advice, he was around and say, what do you think of this? I want to know what young people think of this. And there are so many anecdotes that I can think of, but what I will remember of him was that although he was my leader, although he was a senior to me, much more experienced, a teacher really, he made you feel comfortable, like you were talking to a friend and a colleague. And that, I think, is a very rare trait among people, and especially among leaders in politics.
You say you have lots of anecdotes about your time with Dr. Manmohan Singh. Could you share some of those, some unseen facets of his personality which were captured in the anecdotes that you have, which our viewers may not know about?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I was a very late entrant on Twitter, Rahul. I think I joined Twitter around 2009 or 10, when many Indian politicians were beginning to join Twitter and using Twitter as a means to communicate with people who were obviously moving away from print and television towards social media. And soon after I joined Twitter, and I quickly realized what the pros and cons are of being online, I remember going to Dr. Manmohan Singh when he was Prime Minister and suggesting that, sir, you must be on Twitter. We must get you onto Twitter. And explaining to him why Twitter was important. And he was not someone who was savvy about social media. And soon after that, we created a PMO India account. He didn't have a personal Dr. Manmohan Singh account, but he had a PMO India account. And he was very honest, very candid in saying that I don't know much about this, but if you think it's an important platform, if you think that it's an important means of communication, then I'm all for it. Please meet my media advisor. Please meet my media team. Please sort out the nuts and bolts, and I'm willing to get onto it. So a man who was extremely honest, had no insecurities about him, was willing to accept an area that he didn't know much about and bring in people who knew more about it, trust them, and allow them to run that process. Which I think that's true leadership. That's true. That's the way good leaders work. I remember once when I was an IT minister in his government, and we were talking about the national e-governance plan, which was essentially used to use the internet, the power of the internet and technology to disintermediate government, to allow for citizens to access services far more efficiently, eliminate corruption, eliminate layers of bureaucracy. And we had done a very successful project called the Passport Seva Kendra, where you could renew your passport, get a fresh passport through the means of technology and the internet. We had implemented the e-filing of income tax returns. And there was a conversation, a meeting happening where we were talking about interoperability between different ministries, between central government and state governments. So he was very clear that, when we were talking about this e-governance issue and these technical terms came up, Dr. Manmohan Singh was very clear and candid about the fact that he didn't understand those technical terms. But he said very clearly in front of a lot of senior people and officials included that Milind Deora is a young minister in my government. He understands these things and we leave it to his judgment. So I found that very heartening. I found that people who have that kind of style of leadership, that they're people who have no insecurity about them. They don't discriminate on the basis of age or experience. They don't have those traditional thought processes that, because someone is experienced or has age on their side, we should trust them more or rely on them more. He was willing to listen to new ideas. He was open to new ideas.
Milind Deora, for joining us and sharing your thoughts on the life and times of Dr. Manmohan Singh. Thank you. Dr. Manmohan Singh's decade-long tenure as Prime Minister was marked by transformative policies and political turbulence. From leading the India-US nuclear deal despite the left front's resistance to overcoming the hesitation of history, Dr. Singh's leadership shaped a defining chapter in India's modern diplomacy and coalition politics. Here's a look at some of the pivotal moments from his political journey.
Except as may be required for the due discharge of my duties as Prime Minister.
Dr. Manmohan Singh, sworn in as India's 14th Prime Minister on 22nd May 2004. Called as the accidental Prime Minister, he was chosen for the role by Congress chief Sonia Gandhi and went on to serve 2 terms till 2014. During Dr. Singh's first term as the Prime Minister, the world's biggest jobs guarantee scheme, the MNREGA, and the Right to Information Act were rolled out in 2005. On the issue of national security, however, while Manmohan Singh explored the peace process with Pakistan and Hurriyat groups on Jammu Kashmir, but his efforts suffered a major setback after Pakistan-sponsored terror attack hit Mumbai in 2008. The biggest highlight of Manmohan Singh's first tenure and also the biggest test of UPA coalition government was the India-US nuclear agreement.
The relationship is the India-US civilian nuclear agreement.
The deal would allow India to cooperate with America on a civilian nuclear program. But the left front resisted the deal, eventually withdrawing outside support.
Enormous pressure on your time.
Despite high stakes for the government and his chair, Dr. Singh led the negotiations with America. This overcame the hesitation of history, as he famously said at the summit in Washington in 2005. The tough stance that Dr. Singh took on the nuclear deal and for steering the country through the 2008 economic recession, UPA was rewarded in the next general elections, especially by the middle class in 2009.
I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of India.
The Manmohan Singh-led Congress party won 206 seats in the 2009 Lok Sabha election, increasing its 2004 tally by 61 seats. But the UPA 2 years were hit by policy paralysis.
Where is the Prime Minister of India? Where is the Prime Minister?
Battling the taint of financial scandals and corruption charges against his ministers, from the 2010 Commonwealth Games to the 2G, Adarsh and the coal block allocation. Opposition's escalated charge that Manmohan Singh was simply a puppet Prime Minister while the real decision maker was Sonia Gandhi was an accusation that Dr. Singh could not break free from.
I honestly believe that history will be kinder to me than the contemporary media, or or for that matter, the opposition parties in parliament. I think, taking into account the circumstances and the compulsions of a coalition polity, I have done as best as I could do under the circumstance.
A young boy who bore the scars of partition, but went on to become a reputed financial scholar on his merit, leading a modern nation through sheer merit and determination. A man of few words, but a leader with vision for India. Bureau Report, India Today.
How will history record the life and times of Dr. Manmohan Singh? To talk about his experiences with the man, we're joined now by T.K. Nair, former Principal Secretary to Dr. Manmohan Singh, somebody who worked in the Prime Minister's office as his Principal Secretary for 7 years and was advisor to PM Manmohan Singh till 2014. Mr. Nair, thank you for taking our time. You know, you're amongst those individuals who saw Prime Minister Manmohan Singh at the closest quarters. You know, everybody else had a ringside, outside view. You saw him from within the ring. When you look back at those times, what is it about Dr. Manmohan Singh that strikes you as being most remarkable?
Well, you know, in our large country of huge diversity, in many ways, in terms of religion, in terms of caste, in terms of languages, in terms of state of development, he, through his various reforms, policy initiatives, particularly in the socio-economic fields, actually opened up a new chapter. And when it comes to relations with the rest of the world, it was indeed a new opening. Those were exciting times to work with him, to work under his leadership, and also to learn so much every day from the way he handled people, he managed situations and came on top in spite of occasional hiccups or occasional apparent difficulties. So it was a period of great excitement for those of us who worked with him in his office. I remember really those exciting times and the many occasions when the country faced difficulties, how Dr. Manmohan Singh, through his very inimitable style, which is marked by humility, which is marked by understanding of other people and their concerns. So it was an exciting time, and in retrospect, I believe that it was indeed, in many ways, a golden period for the country.
What do you make of the kind of outpouring of support, of grief that we've seen over the past 24 hours after Dr. Manmohan Singh's passing in his last years? He faced a lot of pushback and criticism for all the alleged scams that happened on his watch as Prime Minister. However, cutting across the political line from the Prime Minister at present, the Home Minister, different leaders across different parties have really come out with a very genuine appreciation of his efforts at nation building. How do you reconcile the kind of criticism he saw in his final years in office with the kind of outpouring of support that we're seeing now?
Well, the outpouring of support from all quarters, from all sections of people, irrespective of the kind of politics they practice, in spite of the ideology they believe, is the most he is the most significant, most telling example of how acceptable his policies were and how admired he is, although he was the subject of ruthless criticism at many times. So those critics, I'm sure, they would have realized that he did whatever was possible within many limitations, what was the best for the country, for its economic well-being, for all-round development, whether it is in the field of education, healthcare, the number of extremely important legislative measures which were brought into being during his time, they speak for themselves. Many of those policies and programs which the then Prime Minister, the late Prime Minister, started, initiated, they are continued with greater vigor, and I'm sure in the days to come they will be only accelerated. There will be no going back, which is the greatest tribute that can be paid to Dr. Manmohan Singh, the late Dr. Manmohan Singh.
You know, as an outsider observing the functioning of the Prime Minister's office, it intrigues me how and why he chose to stake the future of his government on something like the US nuclear deal, whereas on so many other issues, he didn't push back hard enough, or where even if he had a disagreement with what one of his ministerial colleagues was doing, he wasn't using the veto that he could have implemented had he chosen to. So how do you look at this? Picking something like the US nuclear deal, staking the future of his government on it, versus so many other things which he just looked the other way even when he knew that something was amiss and something shouldn't be the way it was actually panning out.
Well, what he was saying does reflect, or did reflect, his own priorities and his own belief, his own convictions. He realized, he was quite convinced that the nuclear deal with the United States was in the interest of our country, for the future progress of the country, in which energy shortage was standing in the way of progress. Energy is the very essence of development in the modern times, and without adequate supply of energy through clean sources, the progress of the country would be hampered. And because of that firm conviction of his, he staked everything for the success of the Indo-US nuclear deal. Yes, he lost the support of one of the partners of the government. The left, pulled out of the coalition, but that was perhaps the price he had to pay for his staunch belief and for his advocacy of the Indo-nuclear deal. That is a telling example, really, that he was not, in spite of his mild manners and his soft exterior, he was a man of firm convictions, a man who stood by what he thought was right for the country.
In the pantheon of Indian Prime Ministers, there's the likes of Jawaharlal Nehru, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Dr. Manmohan Singh, Prime Minister Narendra Modi. How do you think history will rank and judge Dr. Singh?
Well, it's not fair to compare prime ministers. Each of them has had his, plus point. No human being is perfect. All of them have had their own share of, not blame, their own share of shortcomings. And but in spite of that, I would hazard a guess that history will rate Dr. Manmohan Singh as one of the very best of prime ministers in building up the modern India. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru laid the foundations of modern India, but on those strong foundations, Dr. Manmohan Singh built an edifice of progress, an edifice of all-round prosperity, and also, the way forward for the future in many ways.
TK Nair for joining us.
Policy of economic liberalization.
From Thiruvananthapuram, and sharing your thoughts on the Manmohan Singh that you knew and you worked with so closely. Thank you very much. Deeply appreciate you taking out time. Thank you, sir. Dr. Manmohan Singh famously said, "History will judge me more kindly than contemporary commentary about my government's work." Given the outpouring of support, grief that we've seen over the past 24 hours after Dr. Singh's passing, has that started already? To talk about this, we're joined now by a journalist who's seen Dr. Manmohan Singh at very close quarters as his media advisor. Pankaj Pachauri now joins us on this broadcast. Pankaj, given how much of a pushback and criticism Dr. Singh faced in his last years as Prime Minister, What do you make of the level of outpouring of grief, of support, of tribute that we're seeing to Dr. Manmohan Singh after news came that he'd passed last night?
It's a tribute 10 years in the making, and it should have been earlier, but better late than never. What has happened in the last 10 years, Rahul, is that the country had realized that it had a very rare leader and a rarer human being who was ruling in the country. And that is very rare, and for the simple reason that they have seen 10 years of Manmohan Singh, where we had an economy which was about 8% of growth rate per year. We had seminal and exemplary legislations about redistributing that growth among people, like Narega, right to food, right to education, and all these right-based legislations which were envisioned by him and then implemented by him. And also, the kind of divisiveness in politics we see was not there at that time. The kind of bitterness we see in the dialogue and atmosphere was not at that time. He used to always say that peace is the first condition for growth. Just a second, I'm getting a lot of some other channel. Hello?
Kunal, क्या कर रहे हो यार?
I'm getting another channel.
Kunal, do you want to start over or do you want to start from? As Finance Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh was instrumental in opening up the Indian economy in 1991. India lost a gentleman politician. Manmohan Singh would best be remembered as the man who opened up India's economy in the early 90s.
We commit ourselves to providing a firm and purposeful sense of direction to the reform process so that this ancient...
In 1991, the then Finance Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh ended his budget speech with a quote from Victor Hugo.
No power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. The emergence of India as a major economic power in the world happens to be one such idea.
The finance minister in that budget speech did the unthinkable. He opened up the economy and saved the country from further sliding into a state of deep economic stress. Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister of the country, arguably during the most turbulent times. He has been credited as the person who opened up the Indian economy and laid the foundation of economic liberalisation. Considered the father of liberalisation, he dared to do what India had not done in 50 long years. When Singh was appointed finance minister in 1991 by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, India was on the brink of an economic collapse. The foreign exchange reserves had dwindled to levels that could barely cover a few weeks of essential imports like oil and fertilizers. Inflation was rising. Fiscal deficit was widening. India faced a balance of payments crisis. Adding to the challenge, the Soviet Union, a key trading partner, had collapsed, cutting off a major source of cheap oil and raw materials. The situation demanded urgent and bold action. Singh, with his deep understanding of economics, introduced a series of sweeping reforms to stabilize the economy and paved the way for long-term growth. In his famous budget speech of 1991, he made a major policy decision of fiscal adjustment and macroeconomic stabilization. He introduced the liberalization, privatization and globalization reforms and opened the economy for the world.
After 4 decades of planning for industrialization, we have now reached a stage of development. We should welcome this, rather than fear foreign investment. Our entrepreneurs are second to none.
Some of the important policies of the LPG reforms were the removal of the industrial Raj, dilution of the role of the public sector, reduction in import tariffs, market deregulation, and free entry to foreign investment and technology.
India's development is of tremendous significance for the future of the entire developing world. To realize our development potential, we have to unshackle the human spirit of creativity, idealism, adventure, and enterprise that our people possess in abundant measure.
In 1991, the Reserve Bank of India pledged 46.91 tons of gold with the Bank of England and the Bank of Japan to raise $400 million, stabilizing the immediate crisis. Singh devalued the rupee to make Indian exports more competitive in global markets. He reduced import tariffs, dismantled restrictions in foreign trade, allowing India to integrate with the global economy. He presented a new industrial policy ending the license Raj. Industries were previously required to get approvals from most operations. The new policy deregulated nearly 80% of the industrial sector, reducing the number of industries reserved exclusively for the public sector from 17 to 8. This move encouraged private enterprises and foreign investment, fostering industrial growth and job creation. The measures undertaken by Dr. Manmohan Singh allowed banks to lend more freely, supporting economic expansion. Licensing requirements for bank branches were eased, interest rates were deregulated, creating a more competitive and efficient banking system. His reforms not only saved India from the brink of collapse, but also laid the foundation for sustained economic growth. The policies attracted foreign investments, boosted exports, created new industries. Millions of Indians were lifted out of poverty as job opportunities expanded. By dismantling socialist controls, India transitioned into a market-driven economy, setting the stage for its rise as one of the world's fastest-growing economies. Bureau Report, India Today.
Before becoming Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh made his name as an economist, teaching at the Delhi School of Economics, working at the United Nations Trade and Development in Geneva. He also studied at Oxford, Cambridge, was governor of the RBI, vice chairperson of the Planning Commission. So here really was a human being who came from a very strong academic foundation. And to talk a bit about his legacy as an economist, we've spoken so much about his time as Prime Minister, about his innings as a politician, but to speak about his legacy as an economist, I'm joined by leading economist Dr. Atin Roy. Dr. Roy, welcome. You would have been a young economist growing up when Dr. Singh was Chief Economic Advisor, then at the Planning Commission, Finance Ministry, and ultimately Prime Minister. Looking in the rearview mirror, what do you think is the most important economic legacy Dr. Singh leaves India with?
Thank you, Rahul. Well, I must confess that I have two things in common with Dr. Singh. We went to the same college in Cambridge, and he did once take me out for dinner. Not when the economic crisis had happened, just before, when he was in Geneva with the South Commission. And neither of us worked for the World Bank or the IMF, unlike most economists. We both worked for the UN. And therefore, I think I would say that he left behind two economic legacies which have not been commented on. I'm sure many people have commented on many things. Getting India out of its first existential crisis, the nuclear deal, etc. But it wasn't that. You see, Dr. Singh had this amazing ability to lead and therefore to develop teams that would work under his leadership, deliver results. And that started in 1974, when India was facing very high inflation. He was Chief Economic Advisor, and he managed to get inflation under control. Then when he was in the Reserve Bank of India, all that you see in terms of reforms of India's financial system today started when he commissioned a report by Professor Sukumar Chakrabarti on the working of the Indian financial system, whose implementation over the next 10 or 15 years has led to India having a modern financial system. And so on and so forth. But it's quite remarkable if you look at his ability to work with economists older than him. Arjun Sengupta, I.G. Patel, Baricha Minhas, economists who were his contemporaries, Dr. Rangarajan, Dr. Vijay Kelkar, economists who were junior to him, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, Dr. Kaushik Basu, Dr. Monte Kaluvalia. He was able to work with all of them to deliver results for India. And that is the hallmark of a true policy leader. I think, therefore, his legacy, which is unfortunately not being taken up by any of his successors, was to act and behave like a leader in the policy domain and to get others to work with him. That requires two things, which he had in abundance. It requires great confidence in your own technical and analytical capabilities, which he had in good measure. And it requires a very large ego to be able to work with others and give them credit. And he did both. And I think that could be his most important legacy, to the fact that until very recently, India's economy was regarded to be in very competent and capable hands, multiple competent and capable hands. That is a legacy, unfortunately, which has been tarnished now, but that is what I will remember him by.
Dr. Roy, his critics would say he was an overrated economist and underrated politician. Just looking at, his dissertation on Indian exports and trade, and looking just at his academic ability as an economist, where would he stand? You mentioned a lot of his peers, some juniors as well. Where would he stand in your esteem as an economist?
But you see, his academic career, in fact, like mine, was very short. It's a rite of passage in economics. You go into academia, you get tenure, and then if you want to do other more interesting things, you leave. So as an economist, he did what academic economists stop at, which is he was competent in his plumbing, in his use of technical tools, and he had developed a good analytical capabilities. But as an economic policy practitioner, what I call tradecraft of economic policy and practice, he was hugely successful. I think also, if I may, Rahul, this binary that I know my own community of economists use, bad economist, better politician, I think it's false. I think he was a good economist because he had no illusions about being a politician. He was what I call an unelectable. There have been many in our history, unelectables, but unlike today's unelectables, and unlike some unelectables in his own party, his domain expertise and his ability to crisis manage and to deliver prosperity was why he was put in a job. So he was crystal clear. He became finance minister because India was in the middle of an existential financial crisis, and he had to resolve that. He did that with the Prime Minister's full cooperation and the inputs of many others whom he himself is economic. Job well done. He was appointed as Prime Minister in 2004, not because he was electorally, anyone big, but because he was deemed to be the only person who could actually manage a diverse political coalition and deliver results. He was lucky, in my view, in only one respect. Everyone needs a bit of luck, but he made the most of it, which is in 2004, well, for a long time, the Congress Party had lost its ideology. It had no ideology at all. And he was not a threat to